About passions. It is one thing to talk about freedom, and completely different to do whatever comes to mind, letting our passions unrestrained. Every person, and especially those who want to be called civilized, must develop the technique that will allow them to tame their passions. What is passion? Passion is, by general acceptance, any unrestrainedness of the soul that can hinder a person's freedom. With this definition, which I copied from some book, we are given the interpretation of the term as well as its limit. It is well known that our soul is anything but stable. And how could it really be stable when the very reason for its existence is to act as an intermediate aspect to ensure the possibility of communication between the two extremes? The vulnerability of the soul is its basic characteristic. I would say it is its functional characteristic. But this vulnerability is controlled by the intellect, by the wisdom that decodes the vibes of the soul and perceives what is happening. However, if this vulnerability goes beyond certain limits, the soul becomes uncontrollable and rationality is ignored. Then another thought prevails, the absurd logic that allows the otherworldly soul to operate independently. Without a doubt, I confused you by mentioning that the soul acts as an intermediary agent. To comprehend my statement, a brief reflection on what I call philosophical cosmogony is required. It is an approach to what was once done, before what science describes as the beginning of creation. Perhaps it is the first millisecond of this so unknown process, and its approach is purely philosophical. Logically, everything started from the concept of one, which for unknown reasons appeared on zero, neither one in the Greek language. This seems like an axiom, and it is indeed the first and perhaps only axiom of this thesis. Consequently, we witness a logical unfolding that reveals different internal processes within the perceived universe. At this point, as we will only dwell on the first inner fold, when this one expressed itself as two contending subsets, forcing a third to emerge from this conflict to balance them. I have described this process in a rather humorous video, which you can find on my YouTube channel, named Cosmogony. I simply say that the entity of the principle displays three forms in which it folds inwardly. The first is the matter. There is a vast entity, a colossal form, from which the human condition borrows a small piece and makes its own form. This form is not cut out from its origin. The data is continuously processed and then returned after a specific time frame. The second form of principle has to do with spirit, and in this case, the same procedure applies. Man borrows elements from the universal spirit and makes up his own individual spirit. There is no one who can think outside the totality of the universal spirit. Vanguard is no exception. Nothing exists outside the universal spirit. Finally, we reach the third form, which is its soul. Why shouldn't this not work the same way? It operates under exactly the same norms, creating the individual soul with elements borrowed from the universal soul. The only distinct element is that this principle was created as a balancing factor and continues to have the same function at the level of its individual subdivision. What happens with this function is that its global stream carries all the information from the outside world, then somehow passes it to the individual stream, which carries it to the individual spirit, which in turn evaluates it and gives its own messages that will be sent out like personal directions. Unfortunately, at this point, we have to put something else into context. In his book, The Violent Universe, Nigel Calder describes exactly what the title says. Creation is not a heavenly picture, but a picture of fierce conflicts. And if we limit this position to the theoretical space of the universal soul, from which the individual soul draws information, we find it comprises anything but information of peace and love. Those dealing with metaphysical issues refer to this space as the astral level, and it is a space that requires special purification. Unfortunately, that is where the information that makes up the individual soul is drawn from. Let me add, just as a thought, that perhaps this process, that is, the process of purifying this space, is also one of the reasons for human creation. But this is my own opinion, which I cannot substantiate sufficiently. So, it is this soul, still so vulnerable, especially to those stimulations that come from outside, that must be guarded. So when our soul is not controlled by our ego, it is not simply a moment of weakness. It is when the gates of our entity, being unguarded, allow the passage of streams and negative dynamisms. Do not forget that the soul of man is the arena where the fight against so-called evil is fought, because it is there that the battle for the completion of the work of creation is fought. So, when the human soul is characterized by agitation, what conclusions can we draw? At least two. First, that the ego is not in control of our being, and second, that given the opportunity, the external, otherworldly feelings are used by forces that inhibit our evolution. So our first obligation involves not allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by feelings that we do not cause ourselves. One might ask if anyone can do this. I would say yes, we can. The game of creation is not fixed, and nothing happens that man cannot deal with, as long as he acts like a human being. The civilized man claims a conscious presence in the world, and his attitude cannot therefore be accompanied by those passions that are usually found in an uncivilized society. That's where individuality comes first. In civilized societies, the personality must take the lead, but a personality that has been put at the service of the common purpose. I didn't refer at all to what these passions might be. My purpose is none other than to understand one of the functions of the soul, so that we can function properly as human beings, avoiding the mistakes due to misuse of the forms that we carry as human beings. By aiming at expanded consciousness that has transcended individuality, we will achieve the hard task of creating those filters that will not allow our passions to prevail. To reiterate, passion is often described as the uncontrollable essence of the soul that can obstruct human freedom. This is the way